Have you ever felt like you were screaming inside but no one was listening? Like the whole world was moving on while you silently faded away? There is an unseen pain, a pain that remains silent, and yet it hurts more than any spoken word. Because silence, that silence, has a weight that crushes the soul. Rumi wrote, "Silence is the language of God. Everything else is a poor translation." But is what happens when that silence doesn't feel divine? What happens when, instead of peace, it brings emptiness? When it becomes a constant echo of what you can't say, and what no one seems willing to hear? This kind of silence isn't absence. It's a suffocating presence. It's the pain of being surrounded by voices and yet feeling that no one truly listens. It's being present and invisible. It's smiling on the outside while your heart begs for help, but in silence, always in silence. Maybe you're experiencing this right now. Maybe you've gotten used to being strong, to staying silent so as not to bother anyone, to pretending everything is all right, because you learned that no one would stay to truly listen. You don't speak, not because you don't know how, but because you learned that speaking changes nothing, that being vulnerable is risky, and that silence, however painful, seems safer than rejection. But there is an uncomfortable truth that needs to be said. Silence is also a choice that often stems from pain, trauma, abandonment, and yet you remain silent. You continue to allow the world to interpret your absence as strength, when in reality it is exhaustion. You continue to believe that if you are silent enough, perhaps the pain will go away, but it won't. What no one told you is that the silence you feel may be a reflection of the abandonment you experienced, of the emotional absence you carried, of the words that never came, of the promises that were never fulfilled. And so you learned to be silent, to hide, to not need anyone. But that cost you dearly. It cost you your voice. It cost you your truth. And that's why today, silence hurts more than words, because it carries everything you wanted to say, but swallowed, everything you felt, but hid, everything you were, but had to suppress in order to be accepted. Do you feel this? This pain that doesn't speak, but throbs? This urge to scream, but without sound? Then this video is for you. Because maybe what's hurting you isn't sadness, but your soul begging to be heard. And Rumi has something to say about that. So, before we delve even deeper into this painful silence, I want to extend a sincere invitation to you. If any part of this beginning has already touched something within you, write in the comments, tell me, "I feel it," or just "I understand," because here your pain will not be ignored. This video isn't just for watching, it's for feeling, to be lived. Every word here has a reason. Every sentence holds a key. And perhaps, in the midst of this silent pain, you will find a way out. Then leave a like, because it shows that this type of content needs to exist. Sign up, because this journey doesn't end here. In fact, it's only just beginning, and you don't have to go through it alone. Have you ever noticed how some pains are silent? Pains that no one sees, no one talks about, no one acknowledges, but that are there, all the time, corroding from within. It's not the kind of suffering that makes a fuss. It's the kind that settles in slowly, with the weight of time, abandonment, and repetition. Invisible pain is silent. It doesn't cry out loud. It simply hides in small gestures, forced smiles, automatic responses, the "everything's fine" that the mouth says, but that the soul never confirms. That's why, sometimes, silence hurts more than a scream. Because a scream explodes, overflows, finds space to escape. Silence doesn't. Silence gets trapped. It echoes inside, returns, repeats itself. It's like a dark room where your pain speaks to you all the time, but no one else seems to hear. No one asks. No one notices. And when they do notice, it's already too late. Often you disappear. You vanish from groups, distance yourself from people, delete your social media for a few days, but nobody notices. Or worse, they notice, but they don't care enough to ask what happened. And this gradually teaches you that maybe you really aren't that important, that maybe your pain is too small, that maybe you're the one exaggerating. But that's not true. You've just gotten used to not being seen. Perhaps from an early age you learned that feeling too much was a problem, that crying was a sign of weakness, that showing pain pushed people away. So you silenced your emotions. You kept everything inside. You molded yourself to fit into places where your soul couldn't breathe. And the result is this constant feeling of absence, not of others, but of yourself. You begin to no longer recognize yourself. You start living on autopilot, smiling to please, answering out of obligation, existing as if you're always apologizing for taking up space. This invisible pain is like a weight no one sees you carrying, but it's there, and it shapes your body, your mood, your self-confidence. Little by little, you stop dreaming. You stop trusting. You start to doubt even your own worth. And the cruelest part, you start accepting crumbs as if they were all you deserve. A little attention already seems like a lot. I'm here if you need me already seems like love. But deep down you feel that it's not enough. It never was. And when he tries to speak, he freezes. Because he no longer knows if his pain is valid. He's no longer sure if he'll truly be heard. He's been through so many situations where he opened up and wasn't welcomed, that now he prefers to remain silent. But silence, however comfortable it may seem, is a prison. It protects you, but it also imprisons you. It prevents new wounds, but it also prevents new beginnings. And the worst part is, the more you remain silent, the more the world confirms the lie that you don't matter, because the world responds to the energy you emit. If you are silent, it is silent back. If you disappear, it forgets you. If you pretend to be okay, it believes you. And this traps you in a self-reinforcing cycle of pain. You feel it. You remain silent. The world doesn't respond, and then you feel it even more. You got used to disappearing, and nobody noticing. This isn't an exaggeration. It's the emotional reality of someone who has experienced emotional abandonment, emotional neglect, relationships where you had to beg for crumbs of attention, people who only looked for you when they needed something, who only listened when it was convenient, who only saw your pain when it was already screaming. And today, you carry this memory like an emotional tattoo, an invisible mark that shapes your relationships, your fears, your way of giving yourself. But let me tell you something, your pain isn't invisible. It's just not being recognized in the wrong places. The fact that you feel so much, that you're so silent, that you carry the world inside your chest without asking for help isn't weakness. It's depth. It's intensity. It's a soul that has never been embraced in the right way. That's why you might be here, watching this video, searching for something you can't yet name. Maybe someone to listen, maybe a mirror, maybe just the certainty that you're not going crazy from feeling so much in a world that feels so little. And I want to tell you that you are exactly where you should be, because this pain you feel, the pain that seems to be only yours, is, in fact, shared by many. It's collective, but few have the courage to admit it. Few have the courage to face their own silence and see what it's saying. So stay here. We're still going to reopen this wound carefully, poetically, truthfully, and we're going to look at it not to make it bleed more, but to heal it. Because what you feel is real. What you've lived through has marked you, but it doesn't have to define you. There is a way out, and it begins when you allow yourself to be seen again, not by the other person, but by yourself. Now, if something in this video touched a deep place inside you, that place no one else can access, write it in the comments. I also hide in silence. This phrase could be the first step towards making your pain no longer invisible. When the soul falls silent, it's not because it has found peace. It's because it no longer has the strength. Silence, in this case, is not a temple of serenity. It's a precarious shelter hastily built by someone who has already suffered too much from life. It's the refuge of someone tired of crying out for help and not being heard. When the soul falls silent, it is protecting itself, because you have learned that showing pain is dangerous, that being too transparent is an invitation to be hurt again. So it closes itself off, it falls silent. It isolates itself within a body that functions, but no longer vibrates. This wound you carry, it wasn't inflicted yesterday, nor was it caused by a single person. It's an accumulation. An overflow of absences, subtle rejections, broken promises, and hugs that never came. It's loneliness felt even in company. It's that kind of emptiness you can't explain, because you don't even know exactly where it came from, but you feel it, and you feel it deeply, because silent pain doesn't need a reason. It only needs repetition, and yours, unfortunately, has repeated itself for far too long. You protect yourself by staying silent. You protect yourself by avoiding deep conversations. You protect yourself by disappearing when you feel you're about to fall apart. because you've learned that the world has no patience for those who feel too much. And when you feel that something hurts more than it should, your first reaction is to hide it, to keep it to yourself. Because in the past, whenever you tried to open up, you were misunderstood, invalidated, or ignored, maybe even mocked. So now, for safety, for self-preservation, you stay silent, and nobody notices. Because you've learned to smile while bleeding inside. But this silent wound comes at a high price. It doesn't just hurt, it limits you. It makes you believe you don't deserve better. It makes you accept shallow relationships, suffocating jobs, friendships that drain you more than they heal you. It makes you shrink from possibilities, settle for less, distrust any gesture of true love. Because your heart, marked by unspoken pain, has become a minefield. Any approach is a threat. Any deeper touch is danger. And this is not weakness, this is trauma. Spiritual trauma, emotional trauma, soul trauma. The kind of wound that doesn't show up in exams, but shapes your entire existence. Rumi said that the wound is the place where the light enters. But for that to happen, you need to recognize that the wound exists. And the problem is that you learn to be functional, to produce, to smile, to take care of others, while inside, there is only a silent plea for care. But who takes care of those who always take care of others? This is the question that haunts you in the back of your mind. Who holds you up when everything falls apart? Who truly sees the pain you hide so well? Who hears the silence you emit when you're at your limit? Perhaps no one. Perhaps you've become your own fortress, and now you don't even know how to allow yourself to be vulnerable anymore. But living always armed, always on alert, always on the defensive, is exhausting. And there comes a point when even your soul begs for rest. That's why you feel this deep exhaustion that doesn't go away with sleep. Because it's not your body that's tired. It's your spirit. It's your soul carrying memories, pains, and words that were never spoken. You swallowed too many tears. You swallowed anger, disappointment, fear. You swallowed everything you wanted to express. And now you wonder why you feel this lump in your throat, this weight on your chest, this urge to disappear from time to time. But it's not disappearing that you want. It's being seen, without having to scream. It's being embraced, without having to beg. This silent pain, hidden even from God, is the result of years of being strong when all you wanted was comfort, of years of pretending to be in control when everything was crumbling, of years of saying, "I can handle this," when inside you could barely breathe. And even in the face of all this, you continue. You walk, you work, you smile, you love, but you love with fear. You live with breaks. You give yourself only halfway, because you don't know if you can endure another fall. And do you know the cruelest part of all this? You don't even remember what it was like to live without that protection anymore. It's been so long since you armed yourself against the world that now letting your guard down seems impossible. You don't know if there's still a you without that pain, because it's been with you for so long that it's become your identity. But it doesn't have to be this way. You weren't born to live with your soul hidden. You weren't born to silence your truth for fear of being hurt again. There's another way to live, a way where pain isn't denied, but transformed. And this transformation begins the exact moment you stop hiding, not from others, but from yourself. When you look inside with courage and say, "Yes, I am wounded. Yes, I kept quiet out of fear. Yes, I deserve more than this suffocating silence." Because the soul, even exhausted, still pulsates. And what it asks for is not noise. It is listening. It is presence. It is truth. If you've made it this far, if these words have touched something that's been buried inside you for too long, then write it in the comments. My soul is tired of hiding. Sometimes, healing begins with a phrase, a truth spoken at the right time, and this could be yours. There is a point within the soul that cannot be translated into words, a place so deep, so subtle, so sacred, that it can only be accessed in silence. And not just any silence, but the kind that is born from the weariness of hiding, the exhaustion of pretending, the genuine desire to reconnect with something that truly makes sense. This silence is not empty. It is prayer. It is a soundless cry. It is a tear that does not fall. It is the soul, in its rawest form, trying to converse with something greater. It is what Rumi called the divine language, because according to him, silence is the speech of God. Rumi wasn't just talking about mystical spirituality. He was talking about the human soul, about the psychology that precedes books, the pain that precedes words, the healing that only comes when you stop running away from yourself. And the truth is that most of your emotional pain didn't stem from what you were told, but from what you needed to hear and never did, from the affection you expected and never received, from the presence you longed for and never arrived. And this, over time, opens up spaces within you, small gaps where the soul screams, but no one listens, until finally, you also stop listening. But even when you are silent, the soul keeps trying. It sends signals, repeats patterns, generates discomfort, attracts the same situations. It's not bad luck. It's spiritual language. It's how your innermost self calls you back. But in the rush of life, in the noise of others, in the weight of expectations, you stopped noticing the whispers of your soul, and you started to think that living was just that, repeating routines, feigning joy, collecting frustrations. But that's not life. That's emotional survival. The root of this silent pain lies in the places you avoided for protection, in the emotional abandonment you pretended not to affect you, in the relationships where you erased yourself to avoid losing, in the childhood where you swallowed your tears because no one had time to understand. That's why, when everything around you is silent, your soul speaks. And sometimes, what it says hurts, because the truth hurts. The truth that you didn't listen to yourself for too long, that you betrayed yourself in the name of acceptance, that you remained silent where you should have asserted yourself, that you distanced yourself from yourself to fit someone else's expectations. Rumi reminds us that silence is not absence. It's how the heart prays. So what if that silent pain you feel is actually your soul trying to pray? Not with rehearsed words, not with desperate pleas, but with sincerity. A kind of prayer without sound, but full of presence. A call for reunion, for healing, for truth. A cry for your return to what you always were, before the world molded you through pain. This is the beauty, and also the hardship of the true spiritual path. It doesn't begin in peace, it begins in pain. It begins in breaking, it begins the moment you realize you can no longer sustain the mask, the weight, the character. And it is at this exact point that many give up, because it hurts. Because opening your soul after years of being locked away is like facing the light after a long time in the dark. Your eyes burn, your body recoils. The instinct is to close again, but if you persevere, something begins to change. You begin to realize that this pain is not a punishment. It's a calling, a push inward, a push toward your true home, yourself. Pain, when listened to properly, becomes a guide. Absence, when embraced, becomes presence. Silence, when respected, becomes an answer. That's why so often the answers you seek are not in the words others say, but in what you feel when you are alone, when everything falls silent, when the outside world loses its meaning, and only the inner world seems to scream. But the problem is that no one taught you to listen to this world. They taught you to run from it, to fill the silence with distractions, with people, with noise, with consumption. Because if you stop, you feel, and if you feel, you crumble. But ironically, it is precisely in this crumbling that reconstruction is born. It is there, when you decide not to run away anymore, that you find the pieces of who you always were. And these pieces are not outside. They are at the center of your silence. They are in the space where words cannot reach but the soul hears. Perhaps that's why you're here. Because somewhere, even without being able to explain it, you want to listen to yourself again. You want to allow yourself to feel without fear. You want, finally, to answer the call that your soul has been silently making for so long. And believe me, this call is real. It's not an exaggeration. It's not weakness. It's pure spirituality. It's the beginning of a new journey. Not to become someone different, but to return to being who you were before you learned to be silent. And if these words are making sense to you now, if in some way you feel that this video is translating what you never managed to say, then write in the comments. The silence of my soul is beginning to speak. It may seem simple, but naming what you feel is a form of liberation. And liberation often begins like this, with a phrase, with a whisper, with a truth spoken for the first time. What hurts the most isn't always the silence that comes from outside. It's the silence that lives inside, the one you've learned to keep as a shield, as a defense, as an escape. What truly hurts you isn't the other person not listening to you. It's that you've stopped listening to yourself. You fell silent when you most needed to be heard. And worse, you fell silent in front of yourself, in front of your own pain, in front of your own truth. From an early age, you understood that your emotions were too much. That feeling intensely scared others, that crying bothered them, that asking too many questions pushed them away. And, little by little, you molded yourself. You reduced the volume of your needs. You swallowed your tears. You repressed your most authentic impulses. You began to adapt in order to be accepted, to be loved, to avoid bothering others. And in this attempt to fit in, you cut yourself into pieces. You abandoned yourself piece by piece every time you stopped saying what you felt, what you wanted, what you needed. And this abandonment you feel today didn't begin with others. It began there, the exact moment you chose not to embrace yourself, when you preferred silence, not for peace, but out of fear. Fear of not being understood, fear of seeming weak, fear of being rejected once again. But this silence, which seemed like protection, became a prison. And the cruelest part is that you convinced yourself it was normal, that it was part of life, that everyone feels this way, that you just have to move on. But it's not, because every time you remain silent in front of yourself, something inside breaks. And it is in this space of rupture that the loneliest pain of all is born, the pain of no longer knowing who you are. Because when you stop listening to your own soul, everything loses its axis. Relationships become superficial. Days become repetitions. Choices lose their meaning. You may even be surrounded by people, but you remain alone. Because the emptiness you feel is not the absence of people. It's the absence of yourself. It's the longing for a part of you that has been silenced for too long. This is the spiritual key that no one told you. True self-acceptance begins within. It's no use wanting the world to listen to you if you don't listen to yourself. It's no use waiting for someone to come and rescue you if you abandon yourself daily. Healing begins when you have the courage to listen to what you've silenced for so long. When you stop running from yourself. When you sit down in silence and honestly ask yourself, what is hurting me? What have I been hiding, even from myself? And here's something you may never have heard. You are not weak for feeling. You are not needy for needing to be comforted. You are not exaggerating for wanting to be understood. You are human, and humans were made to connect, to express themselves, to listen to each other. True spirituality doesn't teach you to run away from pain. It teaches you to go through it. It teaches you to embrace with compassion that which scares us most. Because pain, when looked at with love, becomes a path. It becomes a bridge. It becomes a lesson. That's why silencing what you feel is so dangerous. Because you're not just repressing emotions. You're disconnecting from your essence. You're distancing yourself from your intuition, your sensitivity, your truth. And the more you silence yourself, the further you become from yourself. The emptier you feel, the more lost you perceive yourself to be. Until one day you wake up and no longer know who you are without the pain, without the fear, without the weight you carry. But there is a way out. And it's not outside. It begins the moment you allow yourself to listen. Not with your ears, but with your soul. When you stop judging what you feel. When you embrace your story honestly. When you recognize that yes, you were silenced, but that now you can choose to speak. You can choose to embrace. You can choose to stay by your own side, even when no one else will. This isn't self-help. This is spirituality applied to life. It's the psychology of the soul. It's a return to your wholeness. You've spent too much time waiting for others to listen. Now it's time to offer yourself what you've always sought outside. Silence doesn't have to be absence. It can be a profound presence. But for that to happen, it needs to be accompanied by listening, truly, by inner acceptance. So if you feel this message spoke directly to a part of you that you didn't even know still existed, if it touched that hidden point you try to ignore, but which is beating stronger and stronger, write it in the comments. I am ready to listen to myself. Because sometimes healing begins exactly like this, with a silent, yet profoundly courageous decision. A decision to return to oneself. Perhaps at this very moment, you are living a story where silence has become the norm. Not a silence of peace, of complicity, of acceptance, but a tense, heavy, dense silence. A silence that doesn't rest. It suffocates. That doesn't unite. It separates. A silence where communication slowly died, where words ceased to exist, and glances avoid confrontation because they know that if they speak, something might crumble completely. Perhaps you are in such a relationship where everything that should be expression has become omission, where everything that should be presence has become disguised absence. And the cruelest part is that in the beginning, it wasn't like that. There was conversation, affection, and unrestrained laughter. But over time, something changed. The silences started to get longer. Responses became monosyllabic. Messages were seen, but not answered with the same heart as before. The connection began to fade, and you, without realizing it, tried to fill alone what could only be experienced by two people. You try hard, you try to talk, you suggest change, but on the other side, all you get is an echo of disinterest. It's not that they tell you directly that you don't matter. It's that they show you this with small gestures, with delays, with calculated absences. And the cruelest part is that deep down you feel that something is wrong. You know you're being silenced, diminished, ignored. But even so, you continue. Because deep down, you still have hope that things will go back to the way they were before. Because you still believe that maybe if you try a little harder, the other person will listen to you again. But it doesn't come back. And this cycle breaks you into invisible pieces. It makes you believe that the problem is you, that you're demanding too much, that you feel too much, that maybe you're even waiting for something that doesn't exist. And then in an almost automatic movement, you start to fall silent too. You start to accept silence as an answer, absence as routine, disinterest as destiny, and worse, you start to call it love, and it's not your fault. The truth is, you were taught to confuse intensity with love. You were taught to accept the bare minimum as proof of affection, to tolerate disconnection as if it were a phase, to endure a lack of reciprocity as if it were maturity. And in this emotional distortion, you lost your sense of deserving. You erased your needs. You accepted crumbs as if they were banquets. And perhaps right now, you're living with someone who no longer sees you. Someone who passes through your days like someone crossing a hallway. Hurried, indifferent, distant. And you, even feeling all of this, remain there. Because the idea of losing is more frightening than the pain of staying. Because you've become so emotionally involved that leaving feels like giving up. But let me ask you gently, what are you trying to save? The other person, or the image you created of a love that was never complete? Silences like that aren't neutral. They accumulate, they scream from within, and the body feels it. The mind becomes overwhelmed. The heart, little by little, builds defenses. You start to distrust, to distance yourself, to shield yourself. And the worst part is that, after so much time in this kind of dynamic, you no longer even know what it would be like to be with someone who truly listens to you, who truly sees you. You've become accustomed to not being a priority, to being an emotional plan B, to being the support, the comfort, the constant presence, without receiving it in return. And what nobody tells you is that this kind of silence is a form of emotional violence, because it invalidates you without needing to say a word. It excludes you even when it's physically present. It transforms your existence into a kind of silent stage, where everything happens except real interaction. And that makes you sick, silently. But it makes you sick. Because nobody was born to live ignored. Nobody was born to beg for affection. Nobody was born to remain silent in the face of their own pain. Your soul feels it, and it has been trying to warn you. That's why this anguish won't go away. That's why this weight you can't explain. That's why these nights, even when you're with someone, you feel completely alone. It's not drama. It's emotional truth. It's your intuition trying to show you that something is deeply wrong, and ignoring it is continuing to feed a cycle of self-neglect. But I know you're afraid. Afraid to let go of something that has lasted so long. Afraid of regretting it. Afraid of being alone. But let me tell you something that perhaps no one else has the courage to tell you. You are already alone. Because being with someone who doesn't listen to you, who doesn't validate you, who doesn't welcome you, that's not presence. It's absence wearing a mask. And living like that is one of the surest ways to lose yourself. You don't have to accept this kind of silence as normal. You don't have to keep begging for space where there's clearly no intention of including you. You deserve emotional reciprocity. You deserve genuine presence. You deserve someone who doesn't silence you, but who invites you to speak, to feel, to be. And that person may not have appeared yet. But do you know who that someone could be right now? You yourself. Yes, because your healing begins when you choose yourself, when you stop waiting for the other person to change and start treating yourself as a priority, when you understand that love should never hurt like this. It should never silence your soul. It should never demand that you erase yourself to be kept by someone's side. Love is expansion, not reduction. Love is presence, not calculated silence. If these words made you see something you already knew but avoided feeling, write it in the comments. I deserve to be truly listened to. Sometimes it's this simple recognition that begins to break the cycle, because what you don't recognize, you repeat. But what you name, you transform. Even when everything seems silent on the outside, the soul continues to scream inside. It doesn't need sound to cry for help. It throbs, pulses, trembles in profound silences. It's the kind of scream that no one hears, but that you feel with every cell of your body. And no matter how much you try to hide, avoid, camouflage it, there comes a time when you can no longer ignore it, because this silent scream transforms into nameless anxiety, into anguish that doesn't go away, into inexplicable insomnia. The soul screams when it's tired of being ignored. And the most tragic thing is that often, it's not the world that ignores it. It's you. You've spent so much time waiting to be heard by others that you've forgotten the most important thing: learning to listen to yourself. True healing doesn't begin when someone understands you. It begins when you stop abandoning yourself, when you listen to yourself patiently, when you look at yourself with compassion, when you stop being the enemy of your own story. Because as long as you continue waiting for the world to validate you, understand you, embrace you, you will remain a hostage to a love that may never come. There is a turning point, and it's not external. It's not someone arriving to fix what was broken. It's not a message that finally arrives. It's not a conversation that finally happens. The turning point happens when, in the darkest silence, you whisper to yourself, enough. Enough of being silent. Enough of diminishing yourself. Enough of living to please those who never knew how to listen to you. Enough of begging for attention while your soul pleads for presence. It's at this moment that something changes. It's not a noisy change. There are no fireworks. No one applauds. It's a silent awakening, but powerful. You begin to realize that you always expected too much from others and too little from yourself. You begin to feel that perhaps you placed your healing in the wrong hands, that perhaps you took too long to realize that what was missing was never the other person. It was you, your whole self, your presence, yourself for yourself. This is the moment when you begin to listen to yourself with compassion. And compassion is not pity. It is loving presence. It is recognizing your pain without judgment. It is embracing your story without shame. It is understanding that everything you have lived through so far does not define who you are, but reveals how strong you were for having endured it. It is accepting that yes, you made mistakes, trusted too much, gave too much of yourself, remained silent too much, but that doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And humanity is the most sacred point of spirituality. You don't need to wait any longer. You don't need to beg anymore. You don't need to plead for anyone's attention. From the moment you truly listen to yourself, the world begins to respond differently, because your energy changes, your posture changes, your frequency transforms, and the relationships that once silenced you now seem too small to contain who you are becoming. What was once a prison begins to seem distant. What was once suffocating begins to be seen with clarity. And with this clarity comes the courage to do things differently. You don't need to become tough to protect yourself. You don't need to shut yourself off to never suffer again. You just need to become so intimate with yourself that no one can confuse you anymore. So aware of what you feel that no one can manipulate you anymore. So connected to your soul that any silence from the outside is no longer interpreted as rejection, but as the choice of others, not as your own fault. And that is revolution. Spiritual, emotional, internal. Because there is nothing more powerful than a woman, or a man, who truly listens to themselves, that honors their feelings, who recognizes their light even after having inhabited so much darkness, who forgives themselves for everything they tolerated, who embraces themselves for everything they kept silent about, who rises up, not with anger, but with self-love. The world tries to convince you that this is selfishness, but it's not. It's emotional survival. It's the root of true healing. Because those who listen to themselves with compassion are freed from the constant need for approval. And in this freedom, a new kind of silence is born. A silence that doesn't hurt, it heals. That doesn't wound, it strengthens. A silence where you can finally rest within yourself, where peace doesn't come from what others do, but from what you allow yourself to feel without guilt. This is what your soul has been trying to tell you for so long, that you no longer need to wait for the other person to come back. You no longer need to insist on what's already gone. You no longer need to prove yourself to be loved. You already are. You already have value. You already have a place in the world, and that place begins within your own heart. If all of this made sense to you, if any word here sparked something within you, leave a comment. My healing begins when I listen to myself. Perhaps this phrase is your starting point, and sometimes that's all the soul needs. A beginning, even if silent, even if timid, but let it be true. There is a type of silence that destroys, a silence that accumulates in the corners of the soul, that weighs on the shoulders, that holds the breath in the middle of the chest. This is the silence of those who don't feel seen, of those who had to swallow words, emotions, truths, of those who learned to be silent so as not to be rejected, criticized, abandoned. This silence, yes, is a prison, but not all silence needs to be like that. The silence that hurts is the one that comes from fear, but there is another kind, a silence that heals, a silence that welcomes, a silence that listens, a silence that, when you allow yourself to truly feel it, becomes a temple. This is the silence of presence, of deep listening, of encountering the soul. It is the silence that arises when you are no longer running from yourself, when you stop running from your pain, your shadows, your unresolved stories. It is a silence where there is no hurry, where there is no judgment, where you can simply be, breathe, listen to what still pulsates, what still burns, what still asks to be looked at. This silence, yes, is sacred. The soul speaks in this space. But to listen, you first need to stop shouting outwardly. You need to silence the external noise, the demands, the comparisons, the voices of others telling you who you should be, how you should act, what you should feel. You need to turn off the autopilot of emotional survival and return to your center, because the soul doesn't speak loudly. It whispers, and to hear the whisper, you need silence. When you embrace what you feel, without denying, minimizing, or distorting it, silence changes form. It ceases to be empty and becomes full of meaning, full of presence, full of soul. You begin to realize that there is something profoundly healing in simply sitting with your emotions, without needing to resolve them immediately, in simply allowing them to exist, without censorship, without guilt, without shame. This process is a rebirth, because at some point in your life you died inside. When you were too silent, when you erased yourself too much, when you tried too hard to be someone others could accept, you were dying. You were leaving pieces of yourself along the way. And now, in this sacred silence, you can begin to be reborn, slowly, gently, with truth. Spiritual rebirth doesn't happen in explosions. It happens in those small moments when you say, I feel this, and you don't try to run away. You don't try to fix it. You just feel it. You just accept it. You just embrace it. Rumi said that the wound is the place where the light enters, but for the light to enter, you need to stop covering the wound with distractions. You need to allow it to be seen, to breathe, to speak, and it speaks in silence. It is in this space that you begin to remember who you are, not who they told you you should be, but who you always were, before the masks, before the fears, before the wounds. You begin to reconnect with your own inner voice, with your own intuition, with the part of you that always knew the way but that was silenced by traumas, by insecurities, by unresolved stories. And this voice of the soul is not harsh. It doesn't blame you. It doesn't judge you. It simply whispers, I am here. And being with it is like coming home. It's like leaving the storm and finding shelter within yourself. It's realizing that you no longer need external approval to feel whole, that you no longer need to be perfect to be worthy of love, that you no longer need to fit where your soul never breathed. It is this awareness that transforms silence into prayer. Because a true prayer is not a list of requests. It is a surrender. It is a recognition that there is something greater within you, something you have always known, always seen, always waited for this moment. The moment when you stop fighting against yourself and allow yourself to exist in your wholeness. And perhaps it is now. Perhaps this video, these words, this moment are your calling. Perhaps you are here not by chance, but because your soul has been speaking to you for a long time, and now you are ready to listen. And listening, at this level, is an act of courage. It is an act of self-love. It is a spiritual act. This is the moment when silence ceases to be absence and becomes presence, when it stops suffocating and begins to heal, when you understand that you no longer need to rush, prove, or explain, that you can simply breathe, feel, and allow, because all the soul asks for is space to exist. If you felt this resonated with something very deep within you, write it in the comments below. My silence is now my temple. This phrase can be your commitment to yourself, your decision to begin transforming what was once pain into presence. And presence is everything, because the soul, when listened to, shows the way, even in silence. If you've made it this far, you've probably felt something that can't be explained logically. Perhaps you've realized that this silence, which for so long seemed like a burden, is beginning to reveal itself as something different, like fertile ground, like a place where pain begins to transform, not because someone came to rescue you, but because you yourself began to see yourself, to hear yourself, to touch yourself with words that no one ever told you, but that somehow were kept inside, waiting to be recognized. The soul doesn't seek ready-made answers. It seeks listening. And when it finds that listening, even if it's in a video like this, even if it's through a phrase that awakens an ancient echo, it begins to blossom. It's subtle, but profoundly true, because somewhere in your heart, there's something you always knew deserved more than absence, more than superficial relationships, more than empty words, more than broken promises. You deserve to be heard, but that doesn't begin with the other person. It begins with you. It begins the moment you accept looking inward with tenderness, with honesty, with reverence. It begins the moment you stop saying everything is fine, when in fact it isn't. And in that instant, when the silent truth finds space to emerge, something profoundly transformative happens. The pain loses its power, because it has been acknowledged. Every word you left unsaid carries a truth trapped between fear and the need to be accepted, a truth that perhaps no one was prepared to hear. But now you are. You are ready, not to shout, not to prove, but simply to feel what previously needed to be silenced. And that in itself is already an act of healing. There is power in feeling, power in fully inhabiting your emotions, even if no one understands, even if the world keeps rushing by, even if people still don't know how to deal with the depth you carry, because that depth is a gift, not a curse. It's the space where your soul touches the sacred, where the invisible manifests, where you stop surviving and begin to live. This video isn't about formulas. It's not about how to be happy all the time. It's not about superficial positivity. It's about truth. It's about giving voice to what was silenced. It's about bringing light to what you were forced to hide. It's about taking that old pain, that absence that hurt so much, and transforming it into presence, into the presence of oneself. The connection you seek out there begins in here. It begins now, because every time you listen to yourself with compassion, a link is remade, a piece of your story is healed, a wound begins to heal, and silence ceases to be a burden. It becomes a sanctuary. It becomes home. It becomes a safe space. And this connection doesn't need many people to be genuine. Sometimes a moment of clarity is enough, an encounter with yourself, a silent tear, and everything changes. Because you change, because you awaken, because you allow yourself to be reborn not as someone different, but as who you always were, before you had to be silent to survive. And if you feel now that this transformation is beginning to happen within you, if something on this journey has touched you in a way that words cannot explain, but the soul understands, then write it here in the comments. My silence is now sacred. Not just any phrase, but a reminder, a silent vow, an affirmation that, from here on out, the silence within you will no longer be a place of exile. It will be a space for encounter. It will be a living prayer. It will be a portal to a new way of existing. Because yes, there is life after pain. There is peace after chaos. And all of this begins when you listen to what has remained silent for so long and decide to honor it. If you've stayed with me this far, it's because some part of the silence spoke directly to your soul. And if that's the case, then you know. This space isn't just a channel. It's a sanctuary. A place where even what hasn't been said finds its way. Where pain finds refuge. Where the soul, even weary, finds the strength to continue. So if this video touched you in any way, sign up, because here, even silence has a voice. And each new video is an invitation to delve deeper into yourself, to transform shadow into understanding, pain into awareness, silence into healing. And if that made sense, leave a like, not for me, but for you, as a silent gesture of recognition, as if to say, this touched me, this resonated with me, this healed me a little. And now don't stop here. The video that's appearing on the screen is a continuation of your journey. It's another part of this spiritual journey that's only just beginning. Watch the next video, because your soul deserves to continue being heard, and I will be there, waiting for you.